Good morning. We are headed to the garden. It is shortly after 6 a.m. I was going to do this garden tour, my first garden tour, later today when I have the kids to help me, because at 12 and 14, those two are pretty great at saying, oh, this is a better angle. They're pretty good at critiquing my recording skills, but I check the temperature and it's supposed to get really hot this afternoon and 30-mile-an-hour winds, which is not ideal for recording. So we're gonna try and see if I can show you most of what we've got going on in the garden mid-June here in northern Iowa. So we don't have a lot of pests or bugs yet. Most of our 30 below zero temperatures took care of that this winter, and when the bugs do come, they usually come from a storm that moves in from the south or the southeast. That's when our bugs come. Some of them will hatch out of the ground like Japanese beetles, I think, do, but the harsher our winter is, the less of an issue we will have with those too. So east is back there. This is the west end of the garden, and these are our red raspberries. They do not need support. They are an ever-bearing kind, and I love them. Every spring I just chop them all off and they come back, and they will produce a little bit of fruit for us this summer. I saw a couple blossoms down here, but their main crop will be late August through frost. I do not know what variety our red raspberries are. A friend dug them out from her patch and gave me some starts, and that's how I started my red raspberries. And she said they were there since her parents owned the property. So they are probably an old heritage kind. Next is our tomatoes. Trying to think what variety they are. They're the Better Boy variety. That's what they are. I know I've got Better Boy in here and one other heirloom kind, and they are looking pretty good. Nice big leaves, no signs of blight, a few blossoms getting started, and we have tied these up with some t-shirt string. If you've watched our last YouTube video, you can see, you remember how we struggled with the clips that we got. But anyway, we've got about 30 tomato plants. We have some over in the other garden, and that should meet most of our tomato needs depending on the year. Next is our potatoes. This here is a red Norland variety, so these, the very first row is just for fresh eating. Those are not, we won't be keeping those or storing them for winter. Those are just for fresh eating. And then the next 4 or 5 rows are the Kennebec variety, and those are our keeping potatoes. So we hilled them as much as we could with as much soil as we had, buried those bottom leaves to stimulate growth, because when your potato is growing, it's sending out roots, and more roots means more potatoes. So when we ran out of soil, when we had no more loose soil to cover the leaves, we covered them with straw. So there's our potatoes. Next is our 3 rows of peas. Oh, my battery might die before I'm done here. Anyway, next is our 3 rows of peas. So the first row is just a snap pea variety that we'll have those for stir fry and fresh eating with dip. And then the last 2 rows are actually the whole peas, and the variety is Penelope. And those we will shell and blanch and put in our freezer. Now, I'm never able to grow enough peas for all of our needs, but we grow some for two reasons. The soil here and the climate here is not ideal for peas. So I would probably need to fill up this whole garden with peas in order to get what our family consumes, in order to harvest what our family would like to consume in one whole season. However, because we can't grow very many peas, peas are a special treat and we might have them on special occasions. And if we need extra, we might watch for a sale and buy frozen peas from the grocery store. Now with this heat wave coming, I'm more concerned about my peas than I am my other crops, because peas are a cold-loving crop and too much heat can stress the plant and cause them to actually abort their blossoms. Now my whole peas, the Penelopes, have just started blooming, so we will see how much of a crop we get. My only hope is that we've had plenty of rain, and they're really shaded, like their roots are very shaded, so their roots should be nice and cool, even though we've got a couple days of mid-90s predicted. So that's another reason to plant your peas very thick and fairly close together, because the roots need to be cool. So with 90 degrees, it'll take a couple days for the roots to get hot or too warm, because it'll stay nice and cool because it's wet down there, because we've had plenty of rain. And Susie, what are you doing in the garden? Susie, get out. Go. Go out. Susie. Get. Such a well-behaved dog. Anyway, as I was saying, I do think that my peas will be okay, but it's things like that that definitely hinder the pea harvest here in Iowa, because we tend to go from cold to hot. We don't have that long spring with weeks of temperatures in the 70s like the peas would prefer. So when my peas are done here, we will pull them out and we will still have time to plant green beans. So this is where my green bean crop will go, and I haven't put any compost or anything on the peas, but when I do plant the green beans, because there'll be a second crop for this year, I will put some compost on my green beans then, just to replenish the soil. So that's all that we've got in this garden: peas, potatoes, and then here on this side of the trellis, down here, that's a purple runner bean, sunflowers. There's my cucumbers, and then I have some Thunbergia just for pretty. Here I have some zinnias and some President Canna flowers coming right there. And here's my tomatoes from this direction. And then here I have some kale and of course some marigolds. And down further at the end, I have some parsley growing in with the marigolds. So I've been working on collecting grass clippings, and you can see here where I've been putting grass clippings on as a weed barrier, and I will put it over here too, where the weeds are trying to come up between the tomatoes and the potatoes. So I'll be gathering grass clippings today as long as the weather allows me to. So this used to be our bigger garden, this one here behind me, but we've expanded the smaller garden, so now we have two gardens that are very similar in size. Here behind me is our strawberries, and you can see I've been working on weeding them. My strawberries are looking fairly poor this year. We'll get enough strawberries for eating, but what happened is our last 2 summers have been very dry, and when your strawberry plant is done producing, it sends out runners, and those are next year's big producing plants. And with a dry summer, the strawberries did not send out as many runners as they needed to. They basically just sat there and survived. So those mother strawberry plants, when they were done producing, did not create baby strawberry plants like they normally would have because the weather was so dry. And I did water a little bit, but watering is just not the same as a good rain. So a rule of thumb is the condition of your strawberry plant in the summer, in the late summer when they're done producing, is what you can use to judge what your harvest will be the next year. So I knew these were looking poorly last summer, so I did not expect a great big harvest. They've just kind of struggled the last 2 summers. So this summer, I think we're gonna be kind of rebuilding. I'm gonna move all of my strawberries down to that end, and then I'm gonna plant a different variety in this end and have 2 different varieties of strawberries. And that way, we will be more likely to have a good harvest, because when one doesn't do well, there's a chance that the other variety will do better. So here's what you're gonna get with homegrown strawberries on a wet year. You do end up throwing some out because wet years mean soft strawberries. So you wanna pick them before they're exactly ripe, because otherwise they start rotting, and it's just what you're gonna expect with homegrown strawberries. You cannot compare them to what you get at the supermarket, because unless you're gonna spray for, you know, blight, spray for rot, spray for slugs, you know, things like that. You just expect that. They're gonna be slightly imperfect. So here is another project I really need to work on. You can see how jagged this edge is here and how the grass is just growing in to the strawberries. See that? And that is why I always say edge control is weed control. This is what it's supposed to look like. It's supposed to have a little hill right there so that my lawnmower wheel can just go right along the edge and cut that all off. But edge control is not my favorite, so I end up pushing it off and pushing it off until it's a huge job. Going down the side of my big garden, I've got more zinnias here and some more canna flowers. Those are President cannas from my grandma, and those actually need to be dug up every fall and stored like potatoes. The roots give kind of a tuber or a bulb, and I dig those out when I dig once we've had frost, and I save those like potatoes, and that is how my family has kept those alive from my grandma. So next here we've got red beets, and I don't actually need to can any beets this year because I've got plenty from last year, so we'll probably be eating most of these fresh and giving some away. And then I have peppers. Those always seem to take a while to really get started, but once they get started, they're pretty good. And then here's some more of my tomatoes. The first one here, that's a grape tomato or a cherry tomato, I can't remember. And we ran out of fence, so that is why that one is on a cage and the rest of them are on a fence. So these tomatoes here are a different variety, and I cannot remember what variety they are. And you can see I haven't tied these up yet, so they're going everywhere. And that is something I need to do today because these branches are reaching out onto the soil, and when the soil splashes on them, especially on a year where we've had so much rain, they're more likely to get blight or disease when the soil splashes up on their leaves. Here's our cabbage. I've got some purple cabbage growing. And then I think this is broccoli here. Yep, this is broccoli. We'll blanch this and put it in the freezer. And then down here I have cauliflower. And then some lettuce, some beautiful lettuce. We really need to be eating salad. There's my carrots. So you can see my carrots here behind me. And normally when I plant my carrots, I put them in a single row. But this year I was using up some old seeds and I planted them, and then I got impatient. And about 2 weeks later, I'm like, oh, these aren't gonna, germinate because the seeds were old. So I took my hoe and I just made a new row and planted some more carrots with fresh seed. So now this is what I've got. Apparently the old seed was good, and when I drug my hoe through it, it scattered them on each side. And so now I have a really wide row of carrots, which I think is gonna be good. I didn't have to thin them, because I already did that with my hoe before they germinated. So that's what we've got there. Right here I have 3 little celery plants, and down there I have my hot peppers for salsa. So with celery, growing up in Pennsylvania, they would, in the fall, we tie the celery up with newspaper and blanch it. That way, like the sun and the temperatures, I don't actually understand if it was the cold, if we did it to protect it from the frost. But anyway, they'd wrap them up with newspapers, and that would make the celery real pale and tender. And they could leave it out most of the winter that way. But here it gets too cold, and we often have a killing frost long before the celery is tender enough to just eat it raw. So I usually chop this up and put it in the freezer, or put it in the blender and freeze it in ice cubes, just to flavor soups and broths and things, that I just want the flavoring for. But rarely does our climate here produce the nice crisp celery that you expect celery to be. So this is mostly for flavoring broths and soup. Sometimes our celery will get so big that in the fall the inside ones are tender enough to eat because they've kind of been protected from the heat and the elements. So sometimes those inside ones are tender enough to eat. Okay, so next is my sweet corn. And here again, I was using up old seed, but I'm pretty sure all of it was the serendipity variety. And I don't know how well it shows up on the video, but these 3 rows, the first 3 rows are a lot smaller, and they germinated, their germination rate was less, and they're kind of yellow. They're more yellow than those rows over there. And so I have 2 reasons that this could be. The one reason is actually my fault, and I'm fairly certain that's the main reason. Number 2, germination rate was probably lower because the seeds were old. I went through my freezer and just planted, what I had. But I'm pretty sure the variety is the same because I've been planting the same variety for a bunch of years now. But the second reason is this is where my potatoes were last year. So we had straw on the potatoes, and when straw lays on top of the soil, it's fine, but when you incorporate it, and I tilled it in this spring because there wasn't much of it and it was all brown, and I thought, oh well, it's already pretty composted, I'm sure we will be fine. But when you incorporate any organic matter into the soil, the soil uses nitrogen to break that organic matter down. So the soil is in the process of breaking down the straw, which makes the nitrogen unavailable to the plants. So I'm pretty sure that's what we've got going on here with these first 3 rows of sweet corn, since that's exactly where my potatoes were last year. So the lesson I learned is don't just assume that something is broken down enough to grow plants in it. So next year I will rake off the straw before I till, or I'll just let it lay on top and plant my seeds through it and not till. So what we're working on with our sweet corn this week is, we're trying to get it all weeded, but we had a bunch of rain yesterday, over an inch I believe. So we're trying to get it all weeded, and then we want to hill it a little bit because corn is sensitive to weeds taking up all its nutrients, because corn really needs a lot of nitrogen. And these weeds that you see on this row, they're really going to take off this week with 90 degrees, and they're going to start really competing with the corn for energy from the soil. So we've really got to get those weeds out of there. And then the other thing we do is, and you can see I've been working on it a little bit, we thin the corn, because like I said, corn is very sensitive to, it takes a lot of nutrients from the soil. So we're taking out any small ones and any that are growing kind of out of the same root. So we just pull those out because it'll help this plant give a bigger ear of corn. And then, believe it or not, some varieties of corn are worse than others, but they also have suckers. That's kind of on the wrong side. Here's one that you can see right here. This is a little sucker corn, and it'll just take energy from this one that could give a nice big ear of corn. Here's another one right here. So we just pull those off. So my battery's getting really low, so I'm just gonna quickly show you the end of the big garden here. And here is grapes that I propagated a couple years ago from a neighbor's plant, and I thought we're gonna get a grape arbor real soon, and we still haven't gotten a grape arbor put up. So I just keep growing them here at the end of my garden. I don't know what they'll look like once I try to put them on an arbor, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And then here is what I call the colicky baby of the garden, and I'm actually very excited, or I should say cautiously optimistic, about my black raspberries this year. They are loaded. They were loaded with blossoms last week, and this week, let me show you. So this week they are forming berries, and they are loaded. So if nothing happens, it looks like it's going to be a good black raspberry year. And I'm actually collecting footage of each step of our black raspberry tending so that I can put together a whole YouTube video on how we take care of black raspberries here in northern Iowa. Well, I'm gonna call that good for this week. I'm gonna try and do another one next week and just rough edit them together. So it probably won't be real pretty, but you can see our orchard behind me. And my coffee sat here and got cold. And you can tell all the work that we've got to do in the garden.